You haven't made a video. You need more followers. Why haven't you shown in a gallery? There's another couple gray hairs. You're still single. I'm just gonna do another drawing tutorial. Welcome back, artists. I'm Garrett and this is GB Brush. Sorry it's taken me a while to film another video in my tutorial series. I've been hard at work on more paintings. I'm trying to fill out this wall here, and you can check out my last video about how I created my home studio in a tiny apartment. In today's video, we're continuing my Drawing for Beginners series. The topic is Human Anatomy Simplified for males and for females. By the way, this is part 6 in my drawing tutorial series, so definitely check out my former videos if we're a little bit ahead of your skill level. These tutorial videos are filmed in a casual long form where I'm just drawing and talking at the same time, and you'll get the most out of them if you draw along with me. Let's change perspectives and get into this tutorial. Today I'm wearing the Hamilton. This is kind of like a rare discontinued version of the khaki automatic because it's got the silver dial, but I like it because it's got a comfortable leather strap and that's not going to scratch anything while I'm drawing. If you want to know how to properly construct the human figure and the human frame, then go back and watch my other tutorial. I'll put the link here. So let's start here with this female version, and I'm just going to use a regular pencil. I'll start roughly from the neck down. The neck muscles, the sternomastoids. You don't actually need to memorize the names of the muscles or anything like that. It's these two long muscles. They connect up from behind the ear and they go down to essentially the clavicle bone right here. And that's what's going to give this line here that comes on the sides of the neck. Even on the more dainty female figures, you're going to notice this. Next, I'm going to put in some trapezoid muscles. You know, the rib cage doesn't actually have this bulb, sticking out the top, but we put that there when we're building our construction lines because we're going to need to put these trapezoid muscles in there. And these are going to connect essentially from the mid-shoulder up to the back of the neck. Now let's go to the shoulders, and these are important because they are visible even on dainty figures, and even when you're people wearing clothes, you can notice them. And that's why we have these kind of ball-shaped figures when we build the construction lines, because the shoulders are going to protrude upward a bit. It's not just going to be a straight line to the elbow. The bicep actually comes from the top of this elbow here, and then it connects under the shoulder muscle here. When you're drawing anatomy or musculature, you need to know, one, where the muscles are, but the figure is always moving and you're always drawing from different angles. So it's actually more important just to know the construction lines, like the baseline skeletons like these, and then also to know where do the muscles connect. Because if you know where the muscles connect, then you'll have a much better understanding of where they're going to end up if the figure's pose changes. And that's going to give you much more of an accurate tool for drawing the figure correctly, even if you're drawing from just imagination. Now let's go on to the tricep. And it's going to kind of loop around here. And then it actually connects again up underneath the shoulder. So it's going to kind of, in this position, it's just going to kind of slope like this. And because this is a female character, we don't want to make her too muscled up. She's already looking a bit muscled up right now, but we could always tone it back once we get everything in the baseline kind of correct position. Now the forearms, there's so many delicate muscles in the forearms that for this tutorial we're essentially just going to skip it. The main thing you got to do is you got to build up the muscles, but just right before it starts thin by the wrist. There's not that much musculature by the wrist, and then the muscles kind of build up around the forearm to get all those muscles that help you twist and turn, and then they're going to connect essentially to the bone right before the elbow. So the elbow is going to stick out a bit by itself. as far as like the numerous muscles that are in the forearm, the most important one is you need to know this big one here. It connects up behind the elbow. I hope maybe you can see it connects up behind it and it comes around. But for a dainty figure such as a female figure like this, we're not going to draw each individual muscle because you won't notice them really. I need to make this elbow protrude out a bit more. And this chick is starting to look pretty buff, but that's just because we've only given her arms. So and I'm going to make her neck a little bit thicker. I'm going to build up her shoulders a bit more too. Now the chest, you can't really see the pectoral muscles for a female character because you got to draw the breasts. But before we draw the breasts, pectoral muscle connects from underneath the shoulder as well. It connects between the shoulder and the bicep. Not that that matters very much, as long as you get it underneath the shoulder. That's the most important thing. And then it's going to kind of come around like this, connecting to the rib cage. And that's going to be all we need to draw for now because we're going to put breasts on top of it. Now, the most important thing with the breasts is to make sure that they don't start over the shoulder. They start under the clavicle and they kind of create kind of like a teardrop shape. And they usually, depending on the size, every female is different, but they usually hang down and a little bit outward. So, and it makes kind of like a teardrop shape that aims up towards the clavicle or towards the mastoids. So I'm not going to make this woman's breasts too heavy set. And for now, maybe I'll make them transparent so you can see how they lay on top of the pecs. There's muscles on the ribs, obviously, but they're very thin. So we could just kind of draw a thin line around the rib cage. It essentially gives us the silhouette that we were already looking for. And then we need to connect the muscles of the front of the stomach. This pose here is kind of at a unique angle, and that's why for the front of this pelvis, I put a line here. So here, this back line, this is where essentially the spine's going to be. So that's like a guide for the back. But from the front, it's coming down the middle of the rib cage, and then it's kind of swerving. It's swooping out a little bit from this pose. And that's going to be her stomach muscles. And notice they curve backwards because the pelvis is tilted forward. Now, when I do my construction lines, I like to put this kind of line on the front of the box. And that's actually going to make the first abdominal muscles here. And then you could just, fit in some other abdominal muscles. There's 6 of them. There's 6 mostly visible ones. And then there's going to be some much less visible ones that swoop down towards the front of the pelvis. Now we need to just connect the muscles on the sides here. And these muscles are actually mostly on the back. So you got to swoop down from the rib cage and then mostly just connect down without making the intersections too harsh. You curve the lines a little bit, and then you got to have these kind of oblique muscles that come around the sides of the rib cage. I got to protrude this rib cage out a little bit more. Then we have a little bit of musculature that comes up over the hips, and we're gonna just skip over all the names of those because for a beginner tutorial they're not as important. Now let's move on to the legs. My apologies. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties and my camera just didn't record the whole section where I drew the legs to this figure. It did capture the second and third drawings, so we'll get back to that soon. But let me just quickly run you through what we missed. So with the legs, there's actually so many intricate and small muscles going on for you to consider. But the reality is, unless you're drawing a hyper-realistic, naked, and extremely fit character, the most important muscles for you to remember are you have this front muscle called the rectus femoris. Not that you need to memorize that, but that's this big one coming in the front. And then the one that most people will often forget is this kind of bulging out one on the inner part of the knee. And this one is called the vestis medialis. And yes, I'm looking at my notes. But I always remember to put this little extra bulge here if the character is flexing their front of their thigh, or if it's a muscular character, just because it would look wrong if you didn't have this little bit of extra mass on the inside of the knee. On the outside, it's mostly tendon wrapping around from the glutes in the back, so it kind of makes a fairly smooth shape. And don't forget, if your character is thin or in certain angles, the glute will actually be peeking through the back of the thigh gap here, so you have a little bit of glute peeking out there. Once you get down to the knee, it does slope kind of down, and you have a lot of tendons going around the knee, but they're relatively thin. You will have a little bit of like bulge for the kneecap, but notice that it is sloping backwards towards the calf. On the calf section, you just have a little bit of musculature on the front kind of side. This is called the tibialis anterior, if you were wondering. And so you might want to put a little bit of meat kind of on the front of that shin, but for the most part, most of the mass is going to be going behind the shin bone, and then you have these two bulging calf muscles. And on the inside of the calf, it's actually going to be a little bit lower than on the outside. So the outside is a little bit higher, inside is a little bit lower. A couple additional things that I tightened up while the camera wasn't running. I realized from this angle that you are going to see a little bit of the lat muscles kind of peeking around the side here. So I drew a little bit of lat muscle stretching down from behind the shoulder to the center back. And then I also added some nipples. When you're trying to figure out nipple placement, the general rule of thumb is to kind of go kind of in the center, kind of slightly pointing outward, of course, because the teardrop is sloping around the rib cage, which is not flat. It's in a spherical shape a little bit. So a little bit up, a little bit out. It's always a good rule of thumb, but trust me, there's a lot of variation out there. Aside from those details, let's jump back now into the original footage. So we have the back of the head here, and then the middle one goes a little bit lower. But obviously, since we're seeing the back, we're seeing more of the rear head. It sounds weird describing like that. Rear shoulder. I'm just going to use layman terms for the rest of this video, possibly. Next, we have the scapulae. The scapulae is like these big kind of flat triangular muscles that connect from just over the rear delta or the rear shoulder muscle, and then they go down essentially to the middle of the middle of the back. They go a relatively straight line, but the most important thing to remember is they connect right over the rear shoulder muscle. The back is kind of tricky because all these muscles are like layered on top of each other and stuff. Let's go on to the lats. They're going to come down like this, and then they're going to connect to the spine in it's kind of tricky to draw because first you have to draw the muscle, and then you kind of have to draw the connection or the tendon part. So it kind of connects like this, and it curves around like this, and they're really big, and they connect around. They don't actually go up to the shoulder. They kind of curve around the back of the shoulder, and then there's these muscles below the shoulder like this, the teres major. You will kind of see that sticking out a bit over the lat when there's a very muscled up character. You will see these lats, they kind of leave a little muscle indentation right here going down from the spine, and we always leave a nice curving back spine, and then we have the curving spine around here. It's just like just a notation of what's happening with the shapes. It kind of divots in. And then these kind of muscles that flare around the sides, they're essentially the ab muscles, but you're looking at them from the back, and they're going to curve in, and they're going to connect the lower parts of the back. And now we finally get to the glutes. Now the glutes actually has like an upper glute here that connects here, and then there's the gluteus maximus. This character's kind of shifted his weight a bit, so it's sticking out a bit more on this side, and then it's sticking out a bit less on this side. And these guys are big, so it's going to stick out a little bit more here, stick out there. Now the glutes, there's a lot of tendon that kind of stretches out from the glute all the way around and down the side of the leg here. And because the leg has all these other muscles, it's going to kind of curve and connect downward. Now there's a bunch of muscles on the back of the leg that connect, and this leg's kind of turned sideways, so I'm going to connect them like that. I don't think you need to learn their names. You just need to know that they connect up under the glute to the back of the knee, and they're going to curve kind of around a little bit. Let's put the tendon kind of coming around here. And then from this angle, we could see that there's some of the muscles from the front of the leg kind of connecting and around, such as this. Now let's go into the knee. So here on this knee on the side here, you can see that it does slope backwards. And then there's a bunch of tendons kind of going around the knee. If you're drawing the back of the knee, it does have this kind of shape where it has kind of like a V shape because you have muscles connecting around the knee joint that goes up to the front of the knee. And then the calf muscles, they're going to be coming from the middle of the back of the knee and then swinging down like so. And now that we're drawing the rear view of the calves, remember I said on the female character that there's like two muscles, and the calf muscle on the inside hangs a little bit lower than the calf muscle on the outside. So always keep that in mind. And then you could connect it with a bunch of tendon down here. And I'm going to straighten this guy out. And then remember, the front of the leg is roughly a straight line down, but with just a little bit of musculature built up on there. And we got to connect it around the knee. So let's give this muscle a little bit more definition. So now let's do his arms. The basic shape of the tricep, the inner muscle kind of hangs a little bit lower. The second head of the tricep goes around the side. And then here in the middle, we have tendons. So that's why you get these like two kind of horseshoe look. Actually, I'm kind of drawing this at the wrong angle now that I look at the angle of his elbow. We're actually going to cover some of this back muscle there. We have a little bit of forearm musculature that swings out around the elbow. So we do want to show off this elbow here. And then once we get past the elbow, it becomes kind of a more simplistic tubular shape of all the smaller muscles that curve around. And I think that looks about right. Maybe drop this a little bit and then swing this out a little bit more. Let's do the other arm. I'm going to jump into a time lapse real quick because it's exactly the same. So what I'm going to do now for the rest of this video is I'm going to jump into a time lapse, and then I'm going to use the rest of my time to just practice my own anatomy drawing on this very complex pose. I looked up kind of like a karate kick pose, and I figured this would be a fun and challenging drawing to do. I'll check back with you guys at the end with any closing remarks, and I'll probably do a couple little touch-ups on this also. So stay tuned, enjoy. there you have it. We have the tutorial of building the human anatomy, or the musculature, onto the human frame. I wanted it to be simple, but it didn't really end up that way. So I'll just say simpler. Some quick little tidbits about completing this guy. Because he's been drawing at a totally different angle than these guys, I got to really dissect some of the tinier muscles that are built into the leg. These are the muscles that I would never really memorize, and I didn't really even need them for these poses at all. But with such a strained and unique pose, you really start to see them under this extreme lighting. You can see how the pec muscles kind of connect underneath the shoulder really well, and you also get to see how the back muscles overlay onto the lats. So there was a lot in how the bicep connects into the elbow and how the tricep connects around it. A lot of interesting things to discover when you start drawing complicated poses and models and stuff like that. So have fun. Hope I helped, and stay tuned for the next video. All right. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. And as always, keep making that art.